Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you just some of the pros and cons to maybe help your buying decision if you're looking for a lens that goes to a very wide focal length. Just a few years ago, particularly we Canon shooters, had very few solid options for shooting wide angle. Now it seems like everywhere I look there are some fantastic options, and I've got in front of me two very different approaches to a very wide focal length. That is 12 millimeters of full frame rectilinear coverage, and these lenses both do a very credible job of going to that extremely wide focal length. But of course they get there in two very different ways, and which way is better really might come down to your own shooting preferences and needs. One is a 12 millimeter prime. This is the Laowa. That's from the new Chinese manufacturing company Venus Optics. They sell under the Laowa brand. And this is the Laowa 12 millimeter f2.80D prime lens. You can see my review of that here if you haven't already. The other option is the new Sigma 12 to 24 millimeter f4, and this is from their Art series. And of course it has a smaller maximum aperture, but it's also a zoom lens. Both of them, just so you know, have curved front elements, and so traditional filters are out. Beyond that, however, they both actually do a pretty incredible job and actually share a number of similarities. One of those being that both of them, although this one is called the 0D, I found that in head-to-head comparison that both of them have fairly similar amounts of distortion. And while the Laowa may have just a tiny bit of edge, and that it does basically have zero barrel distortion, the Sigma is actually very similar and does a remarkable job, particularly for a zoom lens, of keeping very, very low distortion at 12 millimeters. So let's just break down a few of the pros and cons for each one of the lenses. First of all, of course, there is a clearly dramatic difference when it comes to the size of these lenses. The Laowa actually is a very nice compact lens that fits inside the hand, and obviously they have very different form factors. The Laowa actually has overall the better build quality. It's all metal construction, and it is a beautifully manufactured lens that really, as use of it, feels just like a classic Zeiss lens. So beautifully made lens, all metal everything. And the Sigma has a nice build as well, but the Sigma has some metal components, but then over the top of that is their thermal composite, or their version of engineered plastics. I can't say which is the more durable overall, but in terms of the feel of the lens, this Laowa is a beautifully built lens. And it has a great form factor. It's basically palm-sized, very easy to bring along, and it weighs in at a comparatively light 1.34 pounds or 609 grams, and it's only about 3¼ inches long or 82.8 millimeters. The Sigma, by comparison, is much, much heavier, 2.54 pounds or 1.15 kilos. That's 1,150 grams. And it is closer to 5¼ inches overall, 131.5 millimeters. And so it's a much, much bigger lens. And it has a really big footprint because it is so thick around. It is over 4 inches around, while the Laowa is less than 3 inches in diameter. And so that certainly is a big difference, and I don't think you can spin it any other way than that being an advantage for the Laowa. It's the much easier lens to bring along, and let's face it, there aren't going to be too many situations where shooting 12 millimeters is going to be your sole focal length of the day. And so that's certainly an advantage. Also, the Laowa has an aperture advantage. It has a maximum aperture of f2.8 as compared to a maximum aperture of f4, which means the Laowa can let in twice as much light, making it perhaps a more compelling option for shooting the night sky or shooting in interior spaces where you don't have a lot of light. And so neither of them has image stabilization, and so in this case the wider aperture is a strength for that. Beyond that, it also has an advantage when it comes to price, and it's going to retail at $949 US when it comes to market. The Sigma's coming in at about $1,600 US, so a pretty significant price difference as well. And I will add also as a plus that while both of these would require an aftermarket filter system, Laowa is actually planned for that in a way like I've never hardly seen, in that they're actually releasing a custom-made filter adapter or filter holder for the Laowa lens at a very reasonable $75 price point, which if you've actually ever shopped for the aftermarket systems, that makes it, you know, very inexpensive. And on top of that, they've designed it to where it can take 100mm square filters instead of 150mm, and so that makes the filters themselves considerably cheaper. With the Sigma, when an aftermarket comes along, you can be sure, because of its massive front element, that it is going to require 150mm filters and a much more expensive filter holder. And so there is another plus for it. On top of that, I think what will be an advantage for those that want to shoot architecture is that Laowa is also designing a custom-built shift adapter for this lens, which means that it will make it even more useful for shooting interior spaces or architecture with that shift mechanism. And while it's not cheap, I think it's either around $250 is what it will cost. Of course, if you're looking at an equivalent tilt shift lens, you're looking at a whole lot more money. And so that's certainly a perk there. Now, looking at the advantages for the Sigma is, number one, it is a autofocusing lens. It has, you know, electronic information back to the body, which allows you to control aperture from the camera body. Meanwhile, the Laowa, everything is manual here. Manual focus ring. It does have a beautiful manual focus ring, but you have to manually focus. You know, although with a lens this wide, the truth of the matter is that everything is pretty much in focus all the time, unless you're focusing at something very close. But certainly, once you get it calibrated in, having a good autofocus system, and this has a fast, snappy autofocus motor, that certainly is an advantage overall. And of course, aperture here too, you have to control manually, and it has no electronics in the Laowa. So, you know, being able to have that electronic communication to the body is kind of a big deal for me. I also prefer the color rendition out of the Sigma. The Laowa is a little bit warmer but has a slight green cast, and I just like the color rendering a bit more from the Sigma. I feel like it has a little bit more contrast and pop as well, and so I'm giving the plus there. At wide apertures, it is the sharper lens. The Sigma at f4 is sharper than the Laowa f4, but it's not until about f8 that the Laowa starts to catch up. The Sigma is very consistent in its sharpness across the frame, and while it's not mind-blowing in the center, it's very consistent across the frame, and so you get very even results. And the Laowa in the extreme corners, it's soft and doesn't really fully sharpen up till maybe f11, and by that point you're starting to deal with diffraction. So overall sharpness when I'm going to give to the Sigma. Both of them are about equivalent when it comes to vignette. I would say just a hair less on the Sigma overall. On top of that, both of them have roughly equal flare resistance, although I got a little bit less ghosting out of the Laowa than I did from the Sigma. Beyond that, I would say that chromatic aberrations are roughly similar, but with a slight edge to the Sigma. It really does a fantastic job of controlling chromatic aberrations. So when it comes to the overall optical performance, in most areas, I would say that the Sigma is the stronger performer. Kind of another big advantage for the Sigma, of course, is that it has a zoom range of very useful 12 to 24 millimeters, which means it not only handles the extreme wide end like the Laowa does, and by the way, at 12 millimeters they frame basically equal, and so Sigma definitely has a true 12 millimeters here. So it allows you to do those extreme, but going up through 24 millimeters allows you to hit kind of all of the sweet spots for shooting landscapes, and so very useful there. It isn't, I don't think, quite a true 24 millimeters, but even if it's, you know, 23 millimeter-ish, it certainly has a very useful focus range. And so overall, those are some of the pros and cons for each of them. I can't tell you which is the better lens. It really comes down to your application, which that you need more. I'm Dustin Abbott, and you can find linkage to my reviews of both of these lenses down below. And on top of that, links to follow me on social media, image galleries from both of them. And if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.